The hammer connected with my fingers. Crack. A sound no human hand should make. Time slowed as purple bruising spread like lightning under my skin. Dad leaned closer, his aftershave mixing with the scent of medium-rare steak from the dining room. "Ask that again." "I dare you," he whispered, dropping the rusted hammer back into the junk drawer like it was nothing more than a spoon. Behind him, my sister Vanessa continued chewing her cornbread, eyes briefly meeting mine before returning to her plate. Steak that melted off the bone, garlic asparagus, cornbread muffins. On my plate, a single piece of bread with a smear of mayo. My mother stirred something at the stove, her back deliberately turned as I collapsed to the floor, cradling fingers that bent in directions fingers shouldn't bend. The most terrifying part wasn't the pain shooting up my arm or my fingers swelling to twice their size. It was the silence. No one gasped. No one called for help. No one seemed surprised. "My name is Paula. I'm 25 and a sound engineer. This is the story of how I rebuilt my life using the same hands they tried to break." I was 13 that night, just back from the school library where I'd stayed late because home never felt safe. The air in our house always carried weight, like walking across a floor you knew might collapse any second. That evening, I'd smelled the steak before I even opened the door, my stomach growling loudly enough to embarrass me. I'd stepped into the kitchen, seen my pathetic dinner already waiting, and finally broken my silence. "Where's the rest?" I'd asked, too exhausted to pretend anymore. Dad had been standing near the sink. He didn't like being questioned. Ever. He'd turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "You asking that with your tone?" I'd blinked back tears. "It's not fair. Why does Vanessa get steak and I get this?" That's when Vanessa had giggled from the dining room. "Maybe because I don't look like a drowned rat." No hospital visit followed the hammer. No apology. No punishment for my father. That night, they locked me in the basement with an old ice pack and a wet rag. My fingers throbbed, mangled and crooked, wrapped in a dish towel that reeked of bleach. I spent hours shaking, whispering to myself to stay alive, not out of fear, but out of fury. My fingers healed wrong. No doctor ever examined them. They've never bent straight since. And Vanessa, she bragged about how tough love makes weak things stronger. But they didn't understand what that night had done. Pain like that rewires you. It turns every scar into a blueprint. They thought they'd break me and I'd disappear. Instead, I watched. I stayed silent. I let them forget me. And that was their first mistake, because I started paying attention. Dad had a routine. He left the house every Sunday night at 6:30 sharp, claiming it was church board business, but never returned smelling like hymns. Mom had her own secrets, like sneaking into the school office after hours. She worked there part-time, and rifling through donation funds. I discovered this one evening when I had to drop off a forgotten permission slip and saw her through the office window, counting bills from an envelope marked Field Trip Fund. Vanessa was their darling, but she had more enemies than friends. She wasn't smart, just loud, not talented, just privileged. And me? I was the invisible shadow, but shadows learn how light works. By 16, I had read more than most adults ever will. I volunteered at the school theater to avoid home, learned stage lighting, set design, even how to run cables and speakers. I took notes about everything. I started working at an animal shelter on Saturdays, where I met Catherine. Catherine was in her 60s and ran the shelter like a military base, but had eyes that knew too much. One afternoon, she saw my hand trembling as I picked up a dish bin. "What happened to your fingers?" she asked gently. I opened my mouth, closed it, then shrugged. "Family recipe," I muttered. She didn't push, but 2 weeks later, she handed me a folder containing state documentation, emancipation paperwork, housing referrals, and 3 numbers to call if I ever needed a place to go. "You didn't ask," she said, "but I see everything." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I folded the papers and tucked them into my backpack. I wasn't ready yet, but soon I would be. Because revenge wasn't a sudden explosion. It was slow, careful, silent, and it would come not with a scream, but with a smile. I stayed 2 more years in that house. Even after the hammer, even after the splintered fingers, the locked basement, and the nights I slept with one eye open while Vanessa paraded around like a pageant queen. Because I was planning every second, every step. It started quietly. Catherine got me a spot volunteering at the local radio station. "She's good with wires," she told the manager. And just like that, I was behind the board on weekends, adjusting faders, testing mics, learning how sound worked, how voices could be amplified, how silence could be recorded. I didn't just learn how to mix, I learned how to listen. My dad's lies were always the same: church board, late meetings, work calls. But I knew where he actually went. The truck yard on Old Harrison Road. I once followed him on foot for over an hour just to confirm it, catching the last bus back home before they'd notice I was gone. There, he met with men in expensive boots, talked in hushed tones, and loaded boxes into the back of unmarked vans. But I wasn't interested in his deals. I was interested in what he feared, and that turned out to be reputation. He was running for deacon at his church, all smiles and fake prayers, shaking hands like he hadn't used them to harm mine. Vanessa was filming cutesy social videos about family values and dinner nights with Daddy, and my mom was now PTA president stealing funds from field trip envelopes. They were building a legacy of lies, and I would burn it with something better than fire: truth. One night, while they were at one of their family dinners at Applebee's, which never included me, I set up a cheap audio surveillance device in the living room, a recycled mic pack from the radio station manager who let me borrow it for what I told him was a school project. I hid it under the old recliner. It ran on a timer and uploaded automatically to an encrypted drive. For weeks, I gathered audio. Vanessa mocking classmates. Mom saying, "Dot. We'll just skim the bake sale money again. No one ever checks." Dad laughing about scaring someone at work so bad they wet themselves. And then the moment I waited for, Dad saying, "That girl Paula, she's nothing, barely human. I should have broken her jaw when she started talking back." He was drunk, slurred, proud. I clipped the file, made a copy, and then I waited. Graduation came. Vanessa got a new car. I got nothing, not even a handshake. But I didn't care because I was almost free. That night, I packed my things and taped a note to the fridge. "You broke me, but not forever. Keep the toast. I've got a bigger table now. Paula." I walked out at midnight, the house asleep, carrying only a backpack and a thumb drive. Catherine met me at the shelter. I'd called her earlier that day to let her know my plan was in motion. She'd already set up a cot and a small job cleaning kennels. I felt lighter that night than I ever had. But I wasn't done. The thumb drive didn't go to the cops. It went to the school board, the church elders, and the PTA. 3 envelopes, 3 sets of carefully timed detonations. I'd collected their addresses months before from the school directory where my mother worked, and from the church bulletin board that listed all the elders' contact information. One contained Vanessa's full video archive, including her faking charity work for views. One included recordings of my mother joking about misusing field trip money for personal treats and mocking poor kids with lunch debt. And the final envelope, the crown jewel, had my father's confession. "That girl Paula, she's nothing, barely human. I should have broken her jaw when she started talking back." The same day those letters hit desks, I uploaded a podcast. Just one episode, just my voice, titled "The Leftover Daughter." I told the truth, every inch of it. No names, no slander, just my story wrapped in calm narration, scored gently with background music from the radio station. I published it through the station's platform where I volunteered, with permission from my manager, who had no idea it was about my own family. It wasn't rage, it was peace. By sunset, the episode had 2,000 downloads, then 10,000. Then it went viral thanks to someone who clipped the line. "When you harm a child's hands, you teach her how to type her own truth." That line became a trend. Within a week, my family was on fire, not literally, but socially. Vanessa's sponsors dropped her. Mom was asked to step down from the PTA. And Dad? The church voted to remove him from the board. He didn't know where it came from. He blamed internet haters. He had no idea it was me because I never used my full name. I didn't need to. The truth carried its own thunder. And I wasn't finished yet because one thing still remained: the house. The one I'd grown up in, where I was locked in the basement, where my bones were injured, where silence was currency and pain was furniture. I had one last thing to do. 6 months after I left home, I was scrolling through local real estate listings that I checked weekly out of habit. It was a Tuesday when I saw the listing go up. 4-bedroom fixer-upper, owner looking for immediate offload, offers welcome. The address, my old house. Turns out, after Dad lost his church title and Vanessa's influencer revenue dried up, things got tight. They stopped paying the mortgage. Then came the letters, then the auction notice. I watched it all happen silently. The house where I grew up, the one where I scrubbed blood from the floor with my left hand while the right was still broken, was now $18,000 behind on payments and begging for a buyer. So I called in a favor. Catherine's cousin worked at a nonprofit that helps transition youth buy their first homes through a grant matching program. She'd mentioned it during one of our shelter dinners 3 months earlier. They were looking for someone reliable, someone with a clear goal, someone who had been through fire and knew how to build from ashes. I sent them my podcast episode, just that. They approved me in less than 48 hours. A week later, I walked up to that rotting front porch, clipboard in hand, new hoodie zipped tight, and signed the purchase agreement. The real estate agent had no idea of my connection to the house until I gave my last name. They didn't even know it was me until I moved in. I waited until closing day, which I knew about because my real estate agent called to confirm the time. The front lawn was scattered with boxes, Vanessa crying on the phone, Dad screaming at someone about how, "This is all fake," and "We're being targeted." I walked right past them with a key in hand. Vanessa froze. What are you doing here?" Dad looked up, eyes bloodshot, mouth open. I turned to them both and smiled a calm, dangerous smile. "I told you I'd get a bigger table." Then I stepped inside. The silence was delicious. They stood there, stunned as the door closed. That night, I didn't dance or scream or blast music. I unpacked one thing only, a brand new dining table, real wood, paid for with my radio station earnings that I'd saved for months. And on it, I placed 3 things: a recording device, my broken hand x-ray from 2 years ago that Catherine had finally convinced me to get at a free clinic, and a nameplate that read, "Paula Greenwood, survivor, not servant." I didn't need to destroy them publicly. They were already eating themselves alive, but I made sure one last message landed. 3 days after I moved in, I hosted my first dinner. Not family, friends, real ones. Other girls from the shelter, from the radio station, even Catherine. And on each plate, a single seared steak. Vanessa used to say I didn't deserve steak. Dad used to eat mine and call it father's tax. But that night, I fed everyone the meal I was never allowed. When I passed the final plate to Catherine, she looked at me and asked, "What made you come back here?" I just smiled. "This place used to be a prison," I said, "but I turned the locks around." As laughter filled the kitchen, I stepped into the hallway and stared at my reflection in the same cracked mirror where my father once called me useless. My fingers still didn't bend right. One knuckle sat a little too high, but they worked. They built this life. They typed my truth. And when I reached up and traced that scar across my hand, I didn't feel rage. I felt power, because they thought they broke me. But all they did was give me something to rebuild from. And when someone rebuilds from rubble, they don't come back seeking revenge. They come back owning everything that tried to bury them. As for my family, they moved in with my mother's sister in the next county over. I heard through former classmates that my father had lost his job at the trucking company after the church scandal. My mother now works as a cashier at the grocery store. Vanessa deleted all her social media accounts and rarely leaves the house. We haven't spoken since closing day, and honestly, I prefer it that way. The only family I need now is the one I've chosen. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. 0 cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.